Hello, and welcome to this installment of the Shift Project Inclusion interview series focusing on issues of diversity, equity, and belonging for cultural networks and organizations. My name is Katie Carey-Watts, and I'm your host for today. I work on research and publications for On the Move, a resource center and network that focuses on cultural mobility. I'm joined today by my colleague, John Ellingsworth, who also works for On the Move in communications. We spoke about his work redeveloping On the Move's recently relaunched website and how accessibility was and continues to be an integral part of that work. Why don't we go ahead and get started?
Yep.
John, thanks so much for doing this. It's a pleasure to talk to you as a new colleague. I was wondering if, to start off, you could tell us, first of all, a bit about your work and how the question of accessibility came to be a part of it.
Yeah, so I kind of started off as a writer or journalist in the culture sector. And then these days I'm working as an editor, doing some things data analysis and then working on websites. And then recently what I've been working with On the Move, redeveloping their website. And, On the Move's been around for about 20 years now. And the old website was from 2012, I think. So it was about 10 years old. It's pretty big and kind of sprawling. And in redeveloping it, it was a big priority just to make it an accessible website, in which the board of On the Move were very clear that they wanted to be a priority. So, that's how I came in.
And as you were mentioning, you were highly involved in this complete redo of On the Move's website. And as far as I understand, you, and as you mentioned, the other people that were involved had to pretty much start from scratch in terms of thinking about accessibility as part of the project. So first of all, what does it mean for a website to be accessible?
It means that people can use it. So it sounds simple, but it's actually kind of complicated because the ways that people use websites vary a lot. If you want a website to be accessible, then you have to think about the user who can't operate a mouse and is navigating with a keyboard. You have to think about the blind user who relies on a screen reader. What about the person who's colorblind, and so on and so on. Then also with websites, I guess there's this extra thing that it needs to work on older technology, with sort of older computers, with slower internet connections, with lower definition displays. That was a big priority for On the Move, especially because you have a global readership. And then sort of a final thing is that there are people who aren't confident with technology. It's kind of easy to forget that if you use a computer every day and it's kind of a big part of your professional life. But there are people for whom the internet is something which they only use when they're at the library, or the internet is basically Facebook for them, or whatever. And so you have to think about if the website is clear for them and if it behaves predictably in a way that they expect.
And what advice would you have for other network organizations that are starting a similar project with little or no experience of thinking about accessibility as it relates to web-based content?
I guess the first thing is to sort of pick your goal. It's good to aspire to perfection, but you have to be realistic as well and think about taking steps towards getting better over time. I think where a lot of people start is they use the Web Consortium Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, which basically lays out a set of criteria that you have to try to meet in order to provide accessible services online. It's divided into three classifications. There's A, there's AA, and there's AAA. And these give you a blueprint if you're starting a new project, but they're also a basis on which to assess a current website, to see where it succeeds or where it fails. So it's very helpful. I guess also I'd say that if you can pay a disabled developer to do the work, then great, and that will get you the best results. I think it's also worth anybody expanding the ways that they know how to interact with a website and trying to sort of get to grips with some of these other ways of using the internet. The simplest one is that you can learn how to navigate with a keyboard. I mean, it's really as simple as that you go to a website and then you hit the tab key. And as you're hitting the tab key, you're going to kind of move around between links on the page. And you sort of see very quickly what websites, work, honestly, which ones can be navigated that way and which ones cannot. And it sort of gives you just a sense of ways that people can interact with sites and what works and what doesn't.
And what kinds of potential obstacles or challenges should other network organizations be thinking about in regards to web accessibility?
I think from a development perspective, there's a real range of different circumstances and pieces of software that people use. I think I mentioned screen readers earlier. It reads out the content that's on the page, basically. And just as there are different web browsers, there's Chrome and there's Firefox and Edge and Safari and so on, there are also different screen readers and they all have little quirks and they all work a bit differently. And they change over time. So it's something which is very changing and evolving. And so one of the obstacles is to keep a website accessible. And with a website, it's not just about how it's built, it's also about what goes on it. So the things that you're posting on there, the content that you're putting on there. In the same way that you could, if you wanted a venue to be accessible, you could build a ramp that sort of allows access for wheelchair users. It could be a great ramp. It could be perfectly placed and like a really nice gradient and so on. But then if you stack boxes on it so that you block it, people can't use it. So similarly, you can kind of set the website up very well, but if you're not keeping accessibility in mind as you're using it and as you're putting things on it, the experience can kind of degrade over time.
Hmm. What were some of the tools that you found most useful when implementing the accessibility features of the On the Move website?
I mentioned earlier the WCAG criteria, which is just a very useful checklist that you can go down and that uses a sort of blueprint, I suppose. And then again, from more of a development perspective, there are some useful small ones that you can do things like check contrast ratios to see if certain color schemes are compliant, if they work well, is it clear enough, can people see it? And one thing that we found is that you need to be a little bit skeptical about tools. There are lots of automated tools that you can use to check compliance. So it's just a little automated thing, and it'll go through a website and it'll spit out a report and say, you did well on this, you didn't do well on that, and so on. And we were using some of those at the early stages and getting kind of good scores. And it seemed like it was going well. And then in retrospect, much too late, but at a certain point, we started manually testing using a screen reader, and it was like, oh my God, it's like 100 things that are wrong that the automated tool didn't pick up. But when you're manually testing, you really find out what works and what doesn't. And then it's not exactly a tool, but like the other thing that was just very helpful was looking at other websites and seeing how they dealt with certain issues. So like a lot of government websites, not all of them, but like a lot of them are pretty good these days, and you can see how they approach certain problems and how they make information accessible.
John, was there a website that you looked to for inspiration that you found particularly well done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm British, so I looked at quite a bit at gov.uk, which is an interesting one because they're very clear in their mission that they want the website to be something which everybody can use. And then they also do a lot of research and user testing and then make that research public. So when they make changes, when they make decisions, they explain why and what the research was that lay behind that. The other thing that was a source of good examples was actually American university websites. I think some years ago there was a lot of litigation around them. Basically, they got sued when the websites weren't accessible. So they've been forced in a way to really up their game. So they're good to look at now.
So fascinating. I'm loving this information. What were some of the key takeaways for you in terms of what you learned while working on the accessibility of the On the Move website?
Or just think about it as an ongoing thing where you have to sort of move towards just improving all the time rather than something which you just do once and then it's done. You just have to constantly keep an eye on it because things change over time, standards change and the tools people use change and your website changes as you add things to it. And one thing that I felt was that a lot of it's about changing habits, really. Like you have a certain way of working, you have a certain way of posting content to the website or thinking about how the website works. And maybe the core of the work is actually just sort of changing your habits and changing your perspective and sort of routes that you go down when solving problems. And it's sort of difficult to shape those habits, but it's definitely worth doing. And the other thing is that it's just really, it's actually very interesting and sort of rewarding work.
Have you gotten any specific feedback from people for whom the improved accessibility features were really important?
Not specifically, no, but so we went online about 3 weeks ago or a bit longer. And frankly, went online still having a big list of things to do related to accessibility and to other things. So I already know there's a bunch of stuff that we still need to address with accessibility on the website. And there's probably a bunch of things that I don't know about. And I think the sort of next step will be finding somebody who can really test it. Like I said, we did some of that manual testing with a screen reader. We used one called NVDA, which is open source and it's free, so anybody can download it and use it. But frankly, if you're just using it for the first time, it's pretty overwhelming and it's a very kind of complex and powerful tool. And so people who are using it really all the time will just use it in different ways to somebody who's using it for the first time. So they'll have different feedback, I think.
Fantastic. Is there anything that I have forgotten to ask you that you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and the question.
Great. If people want to learn more about On the Move and how they worked, are you available to be contacted about that?
Yeah, sure. Our website is onthemove.org. It's on-the-move.org. And then my email address is communications@onthemove.org.
Great. And we will put all the information in some show notes or some links so that the people listening can get that. Thank you very much, John. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
And you. Thanks.